Good morning, everyone, and Happy New Year. I'd like to call this meeting to order. I'm Michelle Owens, President of the Board, and we will start off with our invocation, which will be led by Dr. Loper and then pledge by Dr. Gibbons.
Everyone bow their heads. Remember that we're in the presence of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity to gather today. We ask blessing on all of us gathered. May our words be glorifying and edifying to you. May us show mercy and your goodwill and love to everyone. And as usual, safe travels. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
We'll face the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
At this time, I'd like to acknowledge our court reporter, Miss Lisa Pike, who will be with us for the next couple of days. We thank you for your service. And at this time, we have a resolution. I was gonna do that when we got over there, but that's fine.
Okay. Tom, can you hear us now?
And now, thank you.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
So at this time, Dr. Cleveland, if you could perform the roll call, please.
Dr. Owen,
Present.
Dr. Lippincott. Here. Dr. Joyner.
Here,
Dr. Kennard.
Here.
Dr. Gersh.
here,
Dr. Givens.
Here.
Dr. Dotson. Dr. Loper. Dr. Roth.
here.
Ms. Gaines. Madam President, you have a quorum.
Thank you. At this time, we'll open the floor for any announcements and public comments. Hearing none, we will move on to the next item on the agenda, the Executive Director's Report.
I'm so sorry. I was trying to get David pictures of his presentation. All right. This is the report for January 15, 2025. In licensure, November and December. Right, it's not working all of a sudden. Okay. MDDO, we issued 39 new licenses. That was previously 68. Podiatrists, no new licenses. PAs, 9 new licenses. Through the compact, there were 137 new licenses issued, and we issued letters of qualification to the compact on 16 licensees. We provided certifications of on licensees, 324 to other state boards. In investigations, we received 73 complaints. We closed 24 investigations. We opened 15 new investigations, and total cases open is currently 54. Cases closed within 7 days was 54%. We requested 76 PMPs. 21 of those resulted in additional investigation. As I mentioned in the executive committee, and I'm repeating for the full board, the legislative session did begin on January the 6th. And we have had positive responses on both the Senate and the House side from the chair of the health committees. And so we're feeling very good about getting more action on the Medical Practice Act this year than we have in the past. The actual bill has not dropped yet on either side, but we do have legislatures lined up to introduce it. Yesterday, Dr. Owens and I met with the Cicero Institute representatives, and the discussion was around licensure for foreign medical graduates that are also foreign trained physicians. And so currently, y'all may or may not know, but foreign medical graduates, if they trained outside of the United States or Canada, they have to do additional training in the United States before they can be licensed. And so now there's a new model out there looking at licensing them without the additional training in the United States. And there will be more for this board to consider about that in the future. But we had the initial meeting with them yesterday. Just a fun fact, the IMLC, I think the Mississippi became a member of in 2017. We now have more licensees through the compact than we do through the traditional pathway of licensing in just 7 short years. So I thought that was a pretty interesting fact. Wanted to share it with you today. Any questions?
Is there any precedent for the foreign medical graduates in other states that we should be aware of?
So there's about 8 or 9 other states that have enacted legislation. It's new in every one of those states, and it's a little bit different in every one of those states. And I do have additional information I can share with the board members about each one of those states, what they required and what they didn't require, and also model legislation from Cicero as well as recommendations from FSMB as to what they think it should look like. Okay. So, and while I'm mentioning FSMB, if you haven't already responded about whether you want to attend the annual meeting this year that's in Seattle, we need to be making those travel plans and arrangements. So if you want to attend and you have not yet let us know, please let us know before you leave this session. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the executive director in relationship to the executive director's report? All right. Thank you, Ken. At this point, we'll continue on with the agenda. And first will be the approval of the minutes of the executive committee dated November 20th of 2024. Those minutes are found in tab 7 in your binder, if you're using the binder. And if you have once you've had a chance to peruse them, if there's a motion for approval.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Next, tab 8, approval of the minutes from the board meeting dated November 20th of 2024.
I'll make a
There any
motion-
additions or corrections?
I'll Make a motion to be accepted.
Second.
All right, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay. And next on the agenda is the report of today's executive committee meeting. As you know, Dr. Joyner is joining us on Zoom, and but I am going to go ahead and just give the report for today. So we had 3 appearances this morning, and the first was the personal appearance by Dr. James Hughes, who had a request for reinstatement. The executive committee's decision was that that request for reinstatement was denied. There were some options for further evaluation for him to have an opportunity to be reconsidered. The second was an appearance by Dr. Clifton Scott and Joshua Griffin on behalf of or in concert with nurse practitioner Dana Davis. They were requesting exception to the extended mileage rule for collaboration. The request for that exemption was denied. And then the third was a Zoom appearance by Melissa Sinopoli. From that's an inside joke. From Ocean Springs, and Dr. Ronald Rinker, who was in support. Her request was she's actually a PA who is entering back into practice after a extended period of being out of clinical practice, and so had a proposed reentry program that was put together, a reentry plan, and along with the executive director, and that request was approved. So she will be initiating her reentry process. So you've heard the decisions that were made this morning by the executive committee. Is there a motion to approve the report.
Motion to approve, Gibbons.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion on either of any of the matters mentioned? Hearing none, all in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you. At this point, is Dr. Walters here? I don't see him. Check and see if Lee's outside. Because the next item is an appearance on behalf of MSMA by Dr. Walters. That's not him, no. That's not Dr. Walters. No, that's not Dr. Walters.
I asked for Dr. Volkers and he.
Yeah, that's,
mean,
no.
I know.
Nobody
It's like, that is not him.
Sorry, Dr. That doesn't go well.
I was about to say.
It does not appear that Dr. Volter showed up today.
Thank you. All right. Yeah, and if there's a problem, we might be able to work him back in. Okay, so that brings us to the next item on the agenda, which is a hearing in the case of Richard Eugene Cook, MD, and it's a motion for continuance. Mr. Barnes.
Yes, Madam President. The charges against Dr. Cook relate to the operation of IV hydration practice. Dr. Cook has made, this is his first motion for continuance. It's therefore unopposed, and we request that it be granted.
Okay, is there a motion? All right, any discussion? All in favor for approving the motion for continuance? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, motion for continuance is granted. The next is hearing in the case of Ellis Olson, Dr. Ellis Olson, another motion for continuance.
Yes, ma'am. The charges against Dr. Olson relate to prescribing Legend drugs via telemedicine without conducting necessary examination or lab work. This is Dr. Olson's first motion for continuance. His attorney had a conflict and requested additional time to prepare. So the motion is unopposed and we request that it be granted.
Is there a motion? A second.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstention? All right, that motion is granted. And next is Dr. Mehul Dixit, motion for continuance.
Yes, ma'am. The charges against Dr. Dixit are for professional sexual misconduct. This matter has been pending since May of 2023. Dr. Dixit was suspended without hearing in May of 2023. There was a continuance until January of 2024 was granted in May at the request of his attorneys. Dr. Dixit is also facing criminal investigation and charges, and he has been indicted, and the criminal proceedings are still ongoing. With the consent of his attorney, Dennis Horn, we are jointly requesting that an additional continuance be granted until January of 2026 to allow the criminal process to continue. At this time, it is impossible to say exactly when that will be resolved. But all other terms of the order of suspension that was originally entered by Dr. Cleveland remain in effect. Dr. Dixit is prohibited from practicing medicine until that hearing is ultimately resolved. So therefore, Mr. Horn and I jointly request that the board continue this matter until January of 2026.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes. there a motion?
I motion to accept continuance.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, that motion for continuance is granted. Next, in the matter of Dr. Harvish Goel. Approval of a consent order.
And I'm confident that Dr. Goel is present and will be here in just a moment.
Goel, not Bolters, right? Gotcha.
At this time, Madam Hearing Officer, Madam President, I would request that Dr. Goel be sworn, as there will be some questions for him.
How was there or from testimony about giving the full truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth of God?
Dr. Goel is here. Am I pronouncing it right, or is it Goel? And is here with his attorney, Doug Mercier. I know the board is familiar with Mr. Mercier. He's appeared here many times. We're presenting a consent order that relates to violating board regulations for unsigned, using pre-signed prescriptions. And unless Mr. Mercier has anything to add, I would ask Dr. Goel to come to the witness stand and answer the board's questions. Good morning, and Dr. Goel, and yes, and even though I'm asking you the questions, if you direct your answers to the board, it will be helpful. And the board, your attorney will have a chance to ask you additional questions, and then the board members will also. So my object is simply that we get the board the information necessary, to determine whether to grant this consent order. The charges against you relate to violating board regulations for using pre-signed prescriptions, correct?
That's correct.
And do you admit that you committed that violation?
I do.
Okay. And very briefly, there were times when you were absent and pre-signed prescriptions were left for a nurse practitioner to complete?
No, they completed it, I signed it. That's okay.
Right. And again, in the consent order, you admit that the conduct violated the board regulations. So I'd like to just very quickly go through the terms of the consent order to confirm that you understand and agree with them. And I believe the copy that is in the materials provided to the board is an unsigned copy, but Dr. Goel, I received a signed copy from Dr. Goel's attorney last night. All right. So Dr. Goel, do you understand that if the board accepts this consent order, that you will receive a 6-month suspension of your license, which will be immediately stayed, which means that it will not take effect? Do you understand that?
I understand.
You'll be required to complete additional CMEs over and above the normal requirement for in the areas of prescribing controls, ethics, and record keeping. You understand and agree to that? You'll be subject to periodic unannounced inspections by either the board, the executive director, or the board staff to review your records. You understand that?
I do.
And you agree to reimburse the board's administrative costs.
I do.
And so are you requesting the board approve this consent order with your agreement?
I do.
I tender the witness.
Good morning, Madam President, ladies and gentlemen of the board.
I just have one question for you, Dr. Coel. The conduct that underlies the violations, was it done for the benefit of your patients
Yes, sir.
and for their welfare, to your knowledge?
Yes.
Thank you. Nothing further.
So, at this time, are there any additional questions from the board? Yes, Dr. Lippincott.
Thank you, Madam President. Dr. Goel, could you tell us, in your own words, what did you get in trouble for?
Actually, I was going out of country, so those patients were chronic patients coming for every month for refill of prescription. And I signed those prescription as a refill, but instead of giving to the patient, I gave it to the nurse practitioner because I wanted to make sure that somebody check PMP and do urine test screen before giving those prescription.
Did you know that was against the rules?
I was not aware of that.
Do you know you know that now, right?
I do, yeah.
So, I guess my question is, why didn't you just get the nurse practitioners to write the prescriptions?
So there are some patients, they were not able to get medication in spite of having their nurse practitioner had DA number, but it was somehow there was some glitch in the pharmacy. They were not getting those medications. So I wanted to make sure this patient don't go without those medication when I'm out of country.
And could you tell us a little bit about your practice?
So I'm a Suboxone provider. So that was the main reason.
Do you have your own clinic?
I do, yeah.
You're self-employed?
Yes, sir.
And how many nurse practitioners do you work with?
3 nurse practitioners.
And where's your clinic? Oh, you're located in Campton.
I have office in Flowood and Canton and Gluckstadt.
Thank you. Is the nature of your practice, is it addiction medicine or family medicine or what?
It's a internal medicine practice, but some of the patients are Suboxone patients.
And how long have you been in practice?
27 years.
And have you had any problems like this before?
No, I never had that problem.
Have you ever been before this board before?
Only one time, that was because my office manager hired a nurse practitioner, and we were not aware of that. The nurse practitioner had no nurse practitioner license, but she completed her course. And that's the only time I appeared before the board.
Okay, thank you. That's all the questions I have. Thank you, Dr. Goel.
Dr. Joyner, I want to also make sure that we always give you an opportunity to chime in. Any questions at all?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions of the board?
Real quick, what percentage of your practice is Suboxone versus conventional internal medicine?
30 to 40%.
Is Suboxone?
30%.
And you've never had any run-ins with your prescribing patterns prior to this?
No, sir.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If there are any other questions for Dr. Goel?
No, ma'am.
If Dr. Goel, you may step down.
Thank you.
Sure.
Brief closing remark.
You may proceed.
I would just like to point out to the board and remind the board for those a lot of you were here in the last few years when cases like this has come up. There are some new members. The terms offered in this consent order are consistent with the board's previous decisions the last 4 to 5 years in this area of using pre-signed prescriptions. And of course, consistency with regards to similar conduct is very important for a board like this, for the predictability and for the ability of physicians to understand the consequences of their behavior. And I'd answer any questions the board might have. Otherwise, that completes my presentation.
Very briefly, I think that Mr. Barnes has covered most everything. I would like to say that Dr. Goel has cooperated fully during the investigation. Initially, the investigators wanted a set of records. He gathered them and provided them, and then the investigators wanted additional records. He cooperated, provided them. He's done everything he could to cooperate with the board. He's never had a problem with the board when he charges before this board. So we just ask that be considered as well. Thank you.
Dr. Kennard?
Madam President, I apologize for not asking Dr. Goel while he was up there, but I did have one question, just a point of clarification, because I was a Suboxone prescriber myself, and I know the situation where you may not be available, but the Suboxone needs to be available for the patient. It's a very important drug to keep opioid addicts on track, and understand the pressure to ensure that. I hope that was part of it and it wasn't pure convenience, but I did want to ask this pointed question. Only recently has a DEA relieved practitioners of the need for a sub-certification DEA number to prescribe Suboxone. Pardon me for not maybe looking at the dates so closely, but did some of this have to do with the fact that your nurse practitioner didn't have that certification and you did? And you would be away, and so the pharmacy had a problem filling it because she didn't have her sub-certification? Or was this post that DEA decision to relieve practitioners of that responsibility? I'm sorry if that's complicated. I can reword it.
It was part of it, but it was not the main. Somehow, some pharmacy were not.
Dr. Goel, can you turn on your mic, please? Thank you.
It's part of it, but most of the time, some pharmacy were not able to fill this prescription for the nurse practitioner. There's some glitch with their numbers or something was happening.
That's exactly what I'm asking. The number, is that the sub-certification DEA number that she did not have yet, that you no longer are required to have?
No, she had the number, but there was something, I'm not sure about the insurance, or some insurance were not accepting.
Insurance.
I'm not sure about that. So something was glitch. So I always wanted to make sure those patients should get the prescription.
But that never happened prior, and it hasn't happened since.
No, it happened now. So in January, we have one nurse practitioner who is not, so some glitch. She has a whole Medicaid number. Everything is there. She's working for 1 year, but
Okay.
not being approved.
Just like to know more about the glitch. I mean, because that seems very pertinent to the issue of why you would feel compelled to sign them to make sure the patient got them. Anyway. Thank you.
And just as a reminder, guys, I know we're new with our technology and our updated hardware, but if you are not speaking, if you would just mute your mics, it makes it a little easier for you to hear. And it also minimizes the problems that we have when more than one mic is on at a time. I think there's a maximum, and then afterwards they stop functioning. Any other questions? All right, so at this time, we can entertain a motion. Just as a reminder, the issue before us is approval of the consent order that was provided to you. You have heard from Dr. Goel and from both attorneys representing this matter or involved in this matter. So is there a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor of approving? Aye.
Aye.
Dr. Joyner? Just want to make sure your vote was counted. Anybody opposed? Any abstentions? All right, thank you. So the motion to approve the consent orders passed. Dr. Gold, thank you for your time. So moving on to the next item on the agenda, item number 15 is approval of consent order for Dr. Jeffrey McGillibra or Bray. Sorry, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. McGillibra. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. And Dr. McGillibra just entered the board room, meeting room. He is also represented by Doug Mercier. My paralegal is handing out copies of the consent order, which that's a signed copy, which Dr. McGillibra signed yesterday and returns to us. And if I may proceed. This is slightly different. This is again a request for approval of a consent order. However, you will note that in the materials in your book, there is no charging summons and affidavit. That's because Dr. McGillibra, during the investigation, admitted to his fault and requested that the matter be resolved. And so formal charges were not drafted. However, at this time, I'd ask that Dr. McGillibra be sworn, and then through questioning, we can lay out the facts for the board so you understand what the basis of the charges would be. Could Dr. McGillibra be sworn?
You solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this call is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
If anything. I would call Dr. McGillibra to the stand. Dr. McGillibra, I'm Paul Barnes. I'm the board attorney. Even though I'm asking the questions, if you would, the board members are the ones that's important that they hear that. So if you would direct your answers to them when you can.
Okay.
You are a psychiatrist by trade,
Yes.
correct? You practice in Louisville at Turning Point Geriatric Psychiatry Unit, or that's a portion of your practice?
Yes.
Okay. What portion of your practice would you say that is?
25%.
Okay. Now, as I understand, the statement you provided to the investigative division during the investigation, there's only one medication that's FDA approved for treating agitation related to dementia. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And it appears that there were some problems, one being cost, two, not being able to get this medication on the hospital's formulary that led to problems with being able to properly medicate dementia patients. Is that right?
Yeah.
If you could bend the mic a little bit towards you. Great. Thank you, sir. And this was primarily a problem on discharge of these patients from this 10-bed geriatric psychiatric unit to long-term care facilities. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So as I understand it, and again, they're all doctors, I'm not, so please explain it to the board. What medications did you use to substitute or to deal with the dementia when you were unable to obtain this, the only FDA approved medication?
Rexulti, the FDA approved medication, is not fast acting either. That's another reason. So when patients were agitated, combative, they required a different medication. So Ativan was often used.
You also use benzos?
Ativan is a benzo.
Oh,
yes,
I'm
yes,
sorry.
Yes, sir.
I see that clonazepam, temazepam, or alprazolam. Those were the primary ones you used. Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay. At the time of discharge of these patients to long-term care facilities, you were not always physically present to write the new scripts to follow them to the nursing home or the assisted living facility, et cetera, were you?
yes, that's right.
And so did you resort to using pre-signed prescriptions to provide medications for some of those patients in that circumstance?
Yes,
Do you still do that?
no, sir.
Okay. And you stopped that process in February of 2024?
Yes,
And you can look at your
Okay, okay.
notes if you need to. How are those prescriptions written or issued today?
e-scribing.
Okay. And that was not available before?
No, sir.
And as I understand, the information you provided during the investigation, there's been a significant restructuring at the this Turning Point geriatric unit.
Yes, sir.
Could you explain that to the board?
Well, there was a program director. It was basically a full turnover of staff. The we had an admission discharge coordination nurse who that position was eliminated. They had a lot of new floor nurses. They had a new program director as well.
And again, just to repeat, you no longer use pre-signed prescriptions in any way in your practice?
No, sir.
And I believe you told our investigators during the course of this that you had never been comfortable using the pre-signed prescriptions, but felt like you were doing what was necessary for the patients. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you have anything else you'd like to tell the board or say to the board about this matter?
No, sir.
Attend to the witness.
Dr. McGilbra, Mr. Barnes touched on the necessity for the continuity of care with the prescriptions. And I think you said that this was only a part of your overall practice.
Correct.
How did you begin using the pre-signed prescriptions in the manner we talked about or you testified to with regard to the discharge of these patients? Did you just make that up or just decide that's what I'm going to do?
No, I started working at the facility in 2017. Dr. Hernandez had preceded me and the practice was already in place.
So are you telling the board you just followed in the footsteps of the practice that was already established at the facility?
Yes.
Now I understand that, you know, there are a lot of regulations, a lot of statutes, and not every physician knows all of them, but you know that you did wrong now, correct?
Yes.
And as soon as you were aware that you had been doing something that was against the regulations, what did you do?
We corrected it, made changes, yes.
How did this statement that you've given the board come about?
I met with an investigator and he asked me questions and said I needed to fill out a statement detailing what had happened and how the changes were made.
And you freely and voluntarily agreed to make these admissions and inform the board honestly of what had been going on.
Yes.
No more questions.
I should have flipped the pages in my notes. I had a few questions, which I believe I need to get on the record. Dr. McGilbra, you've reviewed the consent order that's being presented to the board today fully, correct?
Yes.
I just want to make sure you understand the terms would be that you would receive a 6-month suspension, which would be immediately stayed, and that means that the suspension would not be active. It would not go into effect. Do you understand that?
Yes, sir.
And you would be required to take additional CMEs in prescribing controlled substances, ethics, and record keeping.
Yes, sir.
And that your practice would be subject to periodic unannounced inspections of your records by the director or his staff. You understand that?
Yes, sir.
And are you asking the board to approve this consent order today with your agreement?
Yes, sir.
All I have. Thank you.
Dr. McGilbert, thank you for taking the time to come and meet with us today. I would like to kind of follow up on one thing. Because I think it's important when you have the opportunity to be in front of this board that we get a full understanding of your perspective and your story. And sometimes this is not always the whole story. I read your statement and I just was wondering, what is your environment like at the facility where you're working now? I mean, it seems like things there have become probably a little bit more difficult and may not be as harmonious as they've been in the past.
Correct.
So, I mean, what's that like for you? I mean, are you planning on staying in that environment? What steps do you believe are being taken to kind of help improve that situation or circumstance? Because, from our standpoint, this process is really supposed to be about protecting the public. It shouldn't be something that's used to be retaliatory or to get a leg up on somebody or to bring undue scrutiny on people for personal reasons, although we do see instances where that takes place. So I just kind of wanted to give you an opportunity at least to talk a little bit about your environment, and at least some of the concerns that you mentioned. And you don't have to name names or point fingers, but at the same time, I do think I just wanted to give you an opportunity to bring that forward.
Well, staff members had gotten upset with me, and that's what led to this complaint. I have stayed at the facility. I like seeing the patients, and I like the town, and I stick with things when I start them also. But there were faculty members who were angry with me, yes.
And is it your position that basically this was called to this board's attention, even though it was a regular operational thing that other people were doing, but you were singled out?
Without a doubt.
Okay. Thank you. Dr.
Thank you.
Bernard.
Thank you, Madam President. Dr. McGilbert, I have a couple of, the first couple of things that have happened today kind of hit home personally for me. My mom's going through dementia with aggravation. And she's been in some of these facilities are very similar to the ones you manage. And understand there's a push now to not use antipsychotics as a first line in a long-term care environment. Don't know where that exactly came from, but my suspicion is that they were used too heavily to just sedate people with agitation to make them stop, and then there was no more care. So, not to belabor that, but have you found that the ability to prescribe by electronic signature through your health record pretty much solves any issue you had? Whether it be convenience for you when you're away or not, I found it to be so in my practice prescribing controlled substances. In fact, it empowered me because now I knew someone couldn't write a prescription on my behalf without my knowledge and certainly sign it if the pharmacies in my community knew that I didn't send one that way. It really has been helpful
Yes.
to physicians. Do you find personally, outside of what Dr. Owens mentioned, which is also personal, but in your practice, do you find that that relieves you of this situation forever now? In fact, if someone were to write a prescription in this fashion that you actually may or may not have supported
Yes.
consciously or subconsciously, that you would immediately be alerted and be able to rectify that situation because now you strictly use the electronic health record.
Yes.
Okay. I love your answers. I wish I could get better at that. Yes. Great. Thank you.
Any other questions?
One
Um,
quick question. On the incident report, it also mentioned that there was an RN who was doing discharge summaries. Was that part of the routine that was there prior to you, like the pre-signing prescriptions? I mean, were you aware of that? That they had an RN doing discharge summaries?
Yes.
And was that, I mean, that may be just fine. I just don't know enough about whether this was a freestanding unit and what your bylaws say, but is that still going on now, or is that still mainly now done by providers and or physicians?
Myself and the nurse practitioner.
We're doing those now?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Dr. Lippincott.
Thank you, Madam President. Good morning, Dr. McGilvray. I'm Ken Lippincott. I'm a psychiatrist from Tupelo. I noticed, I think you or Mr. Mercier said most of these prescriptions were for nursing homes. Is that correct?
Yes.
It's been my experience that nursing homes don't they don't use PRN benzodiazepines. Is that not, are they able to do that in your experience?
Yes. Limited for a limited period of time.
For a limited period of time.
Yeah.
So were you aware that it was against the rules to have pre-signed prescriptions?
Yes.
Were you aware that that was unlawful when you did that?
It had been going on, so I thought that the staff had basically, if it was already going on when I came there, I thought it was okay.
I had another question about the nature of your practice. Do you work at other inpatient units besides this one?
Yes.
Would you mind telling me, are they, where else do you have hospital privileges and what kind of units do you work on?
Neshoba Hospital.
Neshoba, and is that in Philadelphia?
Yes.
Okay. And do you have a private practice?
Yes.
Okay, so you see outpatients and you see inpatients at Neshoba and Winston and Louisville. Do you? So have you always had a nurse practitioner working with you there at Louisville?
At Louisville, yes.
Okay. And she's doing your discharge summaries and notes now. I'm not sure about the permissibility of getting an RN to do your discharge summaries.
She-
But,
No, I do the discharge summaries.
okay. Okay. Mr. Barnes mentioned that, there's one medication that's approved for, psychosis and dementia. Do you use other medications besides that one, the Rexulti?
Yes.
Well, yeah. Okay. All right. Well, that's all the questions I have, Dr. McGilvray. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Any other questions, Dr. Joyner? Anything?
No, ma'am.
All right. I'm not picking on you. I just don't want you to get left out. So Dr. McGilvray, I guess now we'll almost be ready to let you step down. Is there just closing thoughts? Is there anything, these guys are going to have their closing. Before you step down, is there anything else that you felt like we needed to know or that you wanted to be on the record or brought out about this matter?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Nothing further. No. I'll waive any closure. Nothing further.
All right. So to the board members, the matter before us, you have you've heard the testimony of Dr. McGilvray and also the statements of the attorneys. We do have the consent order and the exhibits attached. So at this time, is there a motion?
I make a motion to accept the action.
Second.
So it has been moved and properly seconded that we approve the consent order for Dr. McGilvray. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? And Dr. Joyner, did we count you as an aye?
I hope you did. I think I
All right.
missed the button.
Second. All right, got it. All right, so the consent order is approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you. Gentlemen, ladies of the board.
Mr. Mercier, is this the last one for you today?
Thanks, sir.
All right, it's good to see you. Happy New Year, guys.
Good to see you.
All right, moving on to the next item on the agenda. Dr. Sarwat Gad, sorry on my pronunciation, issue of approval of consent order.
Yes, Madam President, Madam Hearing Officer, this is a reciprocal or mirror action related to an incident that took place in Florida. Dr. Gad is not appearing here today. He was offered this consent order to accept reciprocal action, and he signed it and returned it and requests that the board approve it.
For the board's benefit, this information is contained behind tab 16 in your binder.
Yes, ma'am. There are the original Florida documents, including the administrative complaint, which contains the charges against Dr. Gad, and the agreed order resolving the charges is contained in the materials. In that, you will note, and it's important, that Dr. Gadd neither admitted nor denied the charges of incompetence and malpractice which were made against him. In brief, a patient was who had been diagnosed with schizophrenia was admitted to Dr. Gadd's care with suicidal ideations. Dr. Gadd stopped 2 of his medications, which he had been on long-term, clozapine and Prozac. The record is unclear whether he replaced those or substituted different medications. According to the Florida Administrative Complaint, the staff made several notations of agitation or concerning behavior from the patient. After approximately a 2-week stay, Dr. Gadd discharged the patient with a 30-day supply of Elavil or amitriptyline. The next day, the patient passed away from what was later determined to be acute amitriptyline intoxication. And after he was charged, Dr. Gadd entered into a settlement agreement that was subsequently approved by the Florida Board of Medicine. He was charged with malpractice, not meeting the standard of care for assessing patients, confirming appropriate medications, and confirming the fitness and suitability of the patients for discharge. Again, Dr. Gadd neither admitted nor denied the allegations. The terms of the Florida agreement were that Dr. Gadd was issued a letter of concern against his license. He was fined $8,000. He was assessed costs ranging from $12,600 to $14,600. He was required to take 5 hours of CME, additional CME and risk management, another 5 hours in the treatment of patients in psychiatric settings. There's several principles, I think, that come into play here when the board is considering whether to enter a reciprocal action. I'll admit to you as counsel, I am unsure whether this board would reach a similar result if we had jurisdiction over the patient, if this board had jurisdiction and responsibility for the investigation. And we do not know the circumstances that may have led the Florida board to determine that a settlement agreement and a settled resolution, an agreed resolution, was the best course. Obviously, these are serious charges. There have been times when the board has asked me, different members of the board has asked why we do reciprocal actions. And I've tried to emphasize that Dr. Cleveland's approach when determining whether to present a reciprocal action to the board is based primarily on patient safety here in Mississippi. If similar conduct occurred in Mississippi with Mississippi patients, would that affect their safety? And of course, the answer in this case is yes. Is it a situation where the public has a right to know, where the public safety also requires that the public have the ability to be aware of serious problems concerning their practitioners in other states? The answer in this case, again, is yes. If this board does not take reciprocal action, then Mississippi patients will not have any easy way or direct way to obtain that information without going to Florida or every state where Dr. Gadd might be licensed and looking at his record there. I checked last night. This is not evidence. This is merely a representation I'm making to you, but he appears to be practicing currently in Lafayette, Louisiana. So certainly there's at least the potential that Dr. Gadd could decide to come to Mississippi. He is licensed here. He could decide to practice. The third principle which I think is very important here, is that a state that is issuing reciprocal discipline should not impose discipline that's greater than the state of origin. That's not a law. It's not a rule that is written anywhere that I'm aware of, but it is certainly a principle of good practice. And we should respect the decision of the Florida board, just as this board would want its decisions respected by other states. And again, this board doesn't have jurisdiction over the incident to investigate what happened to the patient. And therefore, again, even though this is obviously a very concerning incident, and this board might take different action if it was within the original jurisdiction of this board, I request that the board approve this consent order, so there will be a public record in Mississippi of this matter. The terms of the consent order we offered Dr. Gadd were that he would comply with all requirements of the Florida order and comply with the requirements of any additional requirements that other states might impose on him. That includes the CME requirements, and that Dr. Gadd be required to produce proof of that. By including that provision requiring those CMEs, that makes this a public record and a reportable event. We are requiring Dr. Gadd to get 10 hours of CME. It is the same as Florida, but it is nonetheless a separate order, makes this reportable. Dr. Gadd also agrees to execute all necessary releases so that the investigative division can follow up and confirm that he is in fact complying with the Florida order. In order to provide the public of Mississippi with official notice of this event and the charges that were brought against Dr. Gadd and resolved, and so they can themselves question and inquire further if they wish Dr. Gadd to be their physician. I respectfully request that the board approve this consent order as written.
So at this time, do we want to entertain a motion? We'll have time for discussion after the motion.
I'll make a motion
What is your motion?
to approve the consent order.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
Guess as a new one on the board, a couple of questions. Is his license active in the state of Florida now? Or did they suspend it in Louisiana, said it's okay?
Give me 1 second. He's active in Louisiana. I believe that he is licensed. I don't know if he let his license lapse in Louisiana, but I can get that information for you very quickly. I mean, in Florida. Yes, sir.
Jonathan, can you look that up real quick? We can get you that. And I guess, and this is one incident, do we have any knowledge that his data bank has 36 prescribing patterns or lawsuits prior to the settlement?
We can check the data bank report again. That was, I know that it was part of the investigation. I did not review that in preparation for this, Jonathan. And if we need to take a short break to allow us to get the
Whatever y'all think.
information.
My question, I guess, is right now, could he walk across the state border and go to Natchez, Mississippi and practice medicine?
It is my understanding that yes, he could.
Right now, yeah, right now.
That's why I just approved it, because it seems like a lot we don't know. But what we do know is if we approve this, you can't do that.
Well, he can't.
You don't know that.
what we do know is that he could come here to practice, but the public would be on notice of the problems that he has. If the board does not approve the consent order, he could do that anyway.
This does not suspend him.
Okay. Is there any way to go, you said can't go supersede the other state's consent order, but that he would have to at least check in with Ken before he practiced here, outside of redoing a whole consent order ourselves and bringing him in and all that?
I believe that, and I'm having to speculate some here. We would have to, the board could reject the consent order. We could then present a revised consent order to Dr. Gadd. We could add such terms as the board might consider appropriate. We could ask Dr. Gadd, request in the consent order that he decline to renew his license in Mississippi. That's certainly something that we could request. We would simply have to present it to Dr. Gadd to give him an opportunity to either agree or disagree. But yes, sir, we could do that. We could ask.
So I have a question, just a general question about this particular, the issue that led to this, to any discipline by Florida, and this is a malpractice issue, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So, and just for the benefit of the board members, so our board we have historically made distinctions between some types of malpractice complaints. And so some of those things we do not consider under our purview, or our board does not consider, and some of those issues are not addressed by our board. There are some instances in which we do, and it tends to be those situations where it's something really egregious, where you're questioning whether or not that person's a danger to the general public, as opposed to maybe either a temporary or an isolated lapse in judgment or poor decision-making, whatever. So it's a little different, because this kind of, I think, helps to demonstrate some of the differences from one board jurisdiction to another, and some of the things that other boards do involve themselves in, and the way that those things are interpreted that ultimately lead to discipline. And I think it's important because we don't have to mirror another board's actions. That is typically what is done. I'd say we do that more often than we don't. But there are some instances where we have not. So that's just something that we have the ability to choose, and we have the ability to choose that every single time that these are brought to us. And I just wanted to say that for the sake of kind of level setting for everybody. We have a motion on the table. We're still in discussion on that motion, but I think that that's just something that I wanted to bring to everybody's attention as well. But he has signed this consent order and returned it.
Yes, ma'am.
It's really, we don't really have all of the information. It's hard to tell from this complaint from Florida whether it says that he provided treatment, but it also says that his address of record was Louisiana. So I guess, we don't know whether he was doing telepsychiatry or in person. It just says that he provided treatment on several occasions during that 10 week or 10 days or whatever this patient was in the hospital. But anyway, it was clearly a malpractice issue below the standard of care, and I don't have sufficient information to second guess the Florida board, unless we want to tell him don't come to Mississippi.
I think, but can you make a good point? I think, and And this is the line that we tread when we're considering reciprocal actions. The goal is not to try to step in and perform the job that's already been done by another board in making a determination or re-adjudicating something. Like we don't need all that information. We may have questions. We're naturally curious humans. And so there may be questions or things that you might want to know, but as far as the information that you need is that based on the place, the jurisdiction that he was under, the medical board there subjected him to a process and felt that there was a violation that required discipline, and they have levied that discipline. And now, because he is also licensed in our state, then we decide about what we think should happen and whether we would do what we normally do and perform a reciprocal action or not. But we don't have to know all the intimate details because we've not charged him, nor are we tasked with that responsibility.
I guess I'm just a little taken back. I know this board in the past has not tackled malpractice as much as other things, but having been around the block a couple times, I'm not saying that this wasn't malpractice, but there are a lot of other incidents and cases that I've had to deal with that this pales in comparison to that. And I think part of it, my original question was more history would be very helpful. I mean, if this guy's a psychiatrist, we need psychiatrists in the state of Mississippi. I mean, we need that. At the same time, if he's going to cross over the state line, Dr. Kennard pointed out, could we do something without reinventing the wheel where at least he would need to come in front of Ken or us to kind of help us have insight to what happened in Florida? Because this is like one snapshot of one, we don't know this background, if this happened 36 times or a one time or so. I mean, I don't want to limit him coming into the state. I'm also just surprised that this case in and of itself led to this action by the board in Florida.
Ken, won't we, so we have opportunities as a board to gather that information, right? Like we'll get that during renewal, whatever else, right? Because those questions we have to, I mean, if something happens in between your renewal period, you're supposed to disclose it. But I mean, this information comes to us anyway. So we're already actually aware that there's been something, and I don't know how, I mean, if that was the case, I think it might make Ken's life a little bit more difficult because there'd be a whole lot of people that'd be showing up on his doorstep just to kind of give background information about actions in other places too. But go ahead.
Well, I'd just like to remind the board a few things about mirror actions. One, it's accepted throughout the United States that, I mean, if we take an action, we see, y'all probably don't see, but we see all the rolling of additional actions in other states based on the actions that this board took. Now, y'all may have taken that action after a full day of testimony or 4 hours of testimony or however long it is. It is, especially in today's world where physicians are licensed in multiple states throughout the United States, we do not have the resources to gather all of the evidence that the medical board in Florida had before them when they made this decision. We don't have the manpower. We don't have the money. We don't have the ability. I mean, the second we cross state lines, we have zero power anymore to find out anything that goes on. So that I would want y'all to remember that. I mean, and I think mirror actions are important because the citizens and the patients in Mississippi have a right to know that if a physician had an action taken against them, that they can go to our website and look up that physician and see the action. If we do not do mirror actions, that patient may not know that they need to go look at Florida, or they need to go look at Louisiana or California or Michigan or any state you want to pick that may have action on a physician that's also licensed here. And so I would, in this particular case, I would say Dr. Gadd had the right to be here today and speak to the consent order, and he chose not to be here. I think this is a good mayor action. I think it's a good consent order, and I would encourage y'all to approve it. I can answer any additional questions I may have raised during that.
I'd like to call a question. We have a motion on the floor that's been appropriately seconded that we approve the consent order, that we approve the signed and returned consent order from Dr. Gadd. So at this time, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so the motion's carried and the consent order is approved.
Madam President, the next item on the agenda is the approval of a consent order for Dr. Bradley Suggs.
That's not really on my agenda. My next agenda item was lunch.
Yes, ma'am. I was simply going to inform the board that we expected Dr. Volters to speak for at least half an hour. And so therefore, Dr. Suggs and his attorney, Mark Hodges, are planned to be here at 1 p.m. So I was going to suggest that this would be a perfect time to entertain your agenda, Madam.
Awesome. Sounds great. So if that's, and I do think that lunch has actually got delivered early. So, so what we will do is we will use this as a prime time to just recess for lunch. And if you said that they are expected to be back at 1, then we will resume our agenda or reconvene at 1 o'clock. Okay. Great. Thank you.